So we're part of the family engagement arm of DCPS from the central office. Really excited. I'm originally from El Salvador. I grew up in Tacoma Park, Silver Spring area since I was 6. So I've been in and out of DC since then. So I guess 20 something years. Most recently, as Christine knows me from Higher Achievement, I was running our Ward 1 Center at Marie Reed on 18th Street. And yeah, as of about a month and a half ago, I've joined DCPS. So I'm really excited to dive in. And yeah, I'm happy to start. I don't know, Christine, what do you all want to just throw questions out, or what are you envisioning? Or I'm happy
to. So the first thing I just want to do, and I don't want to hijack your introduction, but clearly I have a bad habit of that. But I do really want to just really just highlight and just thank Damian for his work with Higher Achievement, which he mentioned, but I don't, I want to say what an amazing role that was. And I would say, because my child is a participant in it, especially as we saw with COVID, our community service providers, our community organizations, and our organizations like Higher Achievement, DC Scores, they were the first ones to really pivot and do the outreach that our young people needed. I think our schools were struggling with so much, and they really were able to provide that social, emotional, and not just for the kids, I will say for Higher Achievement, really helped us as parents to navigate this huge change that we had all just sort of been overwhelmed with. And it was early on. And I think you guys really did a spectacular job. And you, Damian, did an amazing, amazing work on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I guess what I had sent Damian a list of questions. And I think if folks hadn't seen those, we could either go through those, or actually what might be better, Damian, is if we just open the floor for questions that anybody might have, and then maybe afterwards we can go through those questions that I had sent to you as well. And Moises is on, but I keep promoting him, but I don't know why he won't. I don't know what's going on. Moises Del Rosario is here. Hi, Moises. I don't know if you're coming on. It's somehow glitching. Oh, there he is. Great. Excellent. And he is our mayor's representative. So really excited to have him on. Okay, super. All right, so do we want to do a round robin to see if anybody has any questions they want to ask Damian? He's introduced, I guess, does everyone understand the role of the CAT? Maybe that's something that would be a good starting point. Like, what is it that you do?
Great question. I've been learning that that's been my job in the last few weeks. So the community action team, my understanding of it, so our role is to really support with all things family engagement. And it goes a little bit beyond the school. So part of why I'm here tonight is we go to community meetings. We really want to engage the full community and understand what's going on, what are the trends, what do we need to lift up to the higher ups and eventually the chancellor, et cetera. What do they need to be aware of that so that they can make hopefully decisions that reflect the needs of the community. There's a lens of equity that's built into the job description of where we're intentionally meant to go in and get the voice of perspective from folks that may not be heard as often. Is one of the go-tos. We support PTAs, LSATs, all the like little, I would call them, maybe little is the wrong word, but all the micro like ground level orgs that parents are a part of and try to support that work. It goes, there's a buffet of options. It's a very broad ranging. I know one of my projects this school year is I'll be involved heavily with the renaming of several schools. The mayor had a list of 21 schools that are slated for renaming due to their associations with slavery and rape and just overt racism. And so I think 5 of my schools are slated for this year. And I'd have to check. I'm actually not sure if any of them are Ward 1 schools, but so yeah, that's something I'll help facilitate and get the community input and make sure that we're getting a really robust community input from that. And it's not just like a principal giving the recommendation on behalf of the whole school, which isn't a terrible idea, but we really want, part of the goal is to really have everyone contribute and make these processes more communal.
Excellent. And I do know from past experiences and many conversations with Raquel Ortiz, who held the seat before you, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to, I think, especially since Damian identified as getting the voices that aren't most readily heard from, getting into the sorry, I'm just reading, getting into the communication or into the community, making sure that we're tapping into those networks of relationships and trusts that have been developed sort of outside of the school to get to our families. And it's tremendous. And I know that you've already got a head start with your work through higher achievement. So that should be a nice segue. And I think, of course, anything that we as a committee can do to help you in that role. For those who've had a chance to look into our roadmap, one thing you will notice is that we center our mission also on those students and those families that are sorry, for those who don't know, I have a brain injury as well, so sometimes I lose my thought. Bill, you have these conversations with me ad nauseum, but we're really centering it on our disconnected youth, and of course our families that are the farthest from opportunity and that we are not hearing from the loudest. And so that's always been a really great partnership with us with Raquel, and really looking forward to that continued partnership with you, Damian.
Awesome.
Great. So any questions? I'm gonna, Hannah, you're the reporter. Would you like to kick us off with a question? And, of course, if it's not directed just at Damian, maybe it's something that one of us can also help answer.
I mean,
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're fine. I definitely am here to listen to what all of you think are the things that need to be worked on in this community. I guess more so as someone who's entering, where are the major places for improvement for the upcoming school year? What are you all going to be focusing on specifically?
Damian, can you kick us off with that one?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to look up and see if I had any Ward 1 schools here.
No, I appreciate. Yeah, I was trying to think too. I know Bell. People were talking about Bell.
Bell's on the list, but not slated for this year. I don't think.
Okay.
We're doing this set. So your question, Hannah, is just like, what is the main focus of work? Like what it
for the next school year? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's a massive system, so it's different for each aspect. I know a huge part of it that I've heard about is efforts to make sure students, especially high school students, are catching up on credits, make sure they can graduate on time. At least one of my schools has requested support for a campaign around that. A big part of it is just figuring out COVID protocols that work, and figuring out that balance between like making it work versus, what is an acceptable level of risk in those spaces, and just for everybody involved. I think those are two big pieces. I think there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm still getting versed in it. There's a lot of DCPS has produced a lot of materials about like the directions we want to move around equity, around just engagement overall. I know one thing that Christine asked me about was safe passages. So there's a pretty big push, and actually you might be able to speak to it better than I can because I'm just learning about it, but just around making sure students have safe passage to and from school, and like trying to hit the flashpoints of where that is happening. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to speak to like what is the exact goal of the school system this particular year, because I'm kind of in my little tunnel of engagement and focusing on the things that I see for my role. But yeah, that's kind of hopefully an answer. Happy to try to get more specific if you have any follow-ups.
I personally am really pleased to hear the equity being a focus. I know, and I just saw one of our PAVE representatives. I think is that you, Dylan? Sorry, I'm not quite sure if I've got her loaded up yet.
It's me, Christine. Sorry, I've been I've been trying to figure out how to accept your invite, but it is me, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name's Dylan Ollis, and I'm our advocacy manager at PAVE, and it's such a pleasure to be with you all and Christine in this new space. So thanks for having me.
And full disclosure, for those who don't know me, I wear multiple hats, and I'm also a PAVE parent and advocate. So that is one of my other hats, as well as working with Bill on the USCF roundtable, which I've been a little delinquent on. Sorry, Bill. But I do know that equity lens has been a huge push, especially as we are looking at how that is applied to our resources, and of course making sure not just our schools and our students, but that our families are getting access to those same resources. So I know for me, and I think for many in our community, it's really great to see that that's the lens that DCPS is pushing for. I do know that those have been the conversations for a very long time, but I think as we know, those of us who've been working with district governments and agencies, the difference between talking about it and doing it, sometimes there's, a little bit of a gap in timing. So we're happy to hear that. Any questions from folks regarding those three sort of bullet points that Damian had sent out? I will definitely at the end hit you back up on that safe passage conversation, because I do know that is something that our community, not just 1A, but also 1B and 1C are very interested in. And I think that's kind of where we're going to be looking in the immediate future.
Hi, Damian, I did have a question. At UNCF prior to the pandemic, one of the priorities that our roundtable group had identified was around student discipline, looking at, suspension and expulsions. And I'm pretty sure that was not as high of a priority when students were virtual learning. But as students are navigating, returning to in-person instruction, is DCPS doing any sort of tracking around student discipline to see, where the numbers are in terms of suspensions with kids returning to the school, after, not being socialized in school for a year? And I didn't know if there were any programs or where, if that is something that is actually being looked at internally.
That is a great question. I'm going to actually disappear for a second to write that down, because I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But so,
yeah.
So,
Actually,
go ahead.
No, I really appreciate Bill mentioning that, because I had meant to submit that in our question. It's a problem I know that my child's school's been having, where, it's not just, you'll look silly kind of, words hurt. It's physical violence. It's choking other kids out. It is escalating. And, and these are kids that don't have the same level of challenges that many of our other families are, but across the board, I'm hearing terms like feral, and just teachers are really at their wits' end. Whether or not they're just speaking out of exhaustion, but they're ready to walk out. Like, they're done. They cannot control these kids. And it's a product of, as Bill has identified, being just everything, right? Like, it's just so much for them. And I would love to find out if that's being sort of pushed up as well. Yeah, that's a great, thank you, Bill, for that. Bullying as well, right? Like, they don't know how to deal with, they don't have to deal with their peers anymore.
Well, as an adult that's been working at home for almost 2 years, I feel like I'm in the same boat. My ability of resiliency is, a fraction of what it was prior. And so some of the littlest frustrations, end up being, like ruining a whole afternoon, when that would have been something that would have been easily glossed over, pre-pandemic, and so I can only imagine for our youth, that they are dealing with some of the same struggles.
So Damian, that's something that you'll need to, or that you can sort of look into for us.
Yeah, I can definitely. I mean, the thing that I've been more aware of is obviously everyone's adjusting to trying to keep up with these COVID protocols. And, there's a lot of work associated with all that. So I know a lot of the effort and emphasis right now in tracking is on that. And I know there's quarantining happening. So I haven't heard as much about the behavior piece. I think because COVID has been so front and center over and over again at in almost every instant that I've been present for. So it doesn't mean it's not there. It sounds like it very much is there. And I'm a little bit aware of what happened at Oyster. And, I've been to a few schools on the playground and actually was surprised at how well the kids were. And this was elementary school, but how well they seemed to be kind of getting on.
The middle schoolers are a little bit.
Middle schoolers, yeah. I
remember that. You know my middle schooler. He's totally innocent. He's gonna kill me for saying that, but no, he's kind of like sits in the sidelines all the time and like, oh yeah, that's happening. But even kids that are not actively engaged, they internalize that, and it does affect them. And I think in the scheme of the many challenges that our kids are dealing with, this is probably low on the spectrum. But I'm hearing across other schools as well that it's really a struggle. It's a struggle for the teachers too, and that's and that's something we definitely want to sort of keep an eye on and see, as I'm sort of thinking about like Liliana's role and the support that our partners in our community can provide to give our young people sort of directed attention and additional support. I'm wondering if that can't be, as so we're not just looking at this as in a silo, but really looking at how we integrate our partnerships across communities to help our young people, get what they need.
I think that's a great question.
And I'm going to follow up with you on that. I know at some point our committee had discussed having a follow-up on Mendelssohn's Police Commission Task Force, which did have an education component in it. And they made several recommendations, and I believe discipline in schools was one of them. Has anybody, Bill, do you know off the top of your head? You're muted.
Still have not gotten over that one. In terms of sort of what recommendations came out of the police commission report, I'm not as fully versed on that, but I thought I saw something in the budget, that like, I think it's 2 school years out, that the whole SRO program, is going to have to be retooled or revamped. And so I don't necessarily, have reservations about what the objectives or the goals are, in changing from where we are to where we want to be. But I am always mindful that it's the transition that you have to really worry about, not necessarily the end goal or the objective, but it is sort of how do you switch from one way of doing it to another without, a total disconnect, and, creating more problems, trying to institute change. So I think that's something that we need to be mindful of, during the next couple of school years, lest, all of a sudden you just have a flip the switch and it's a entirely new system. And then you have some of your original problems and new problems, and so just from a systems, analyst point of view, that's one of the concerns I had around policing in school is the transition.
Yeah, we want to make sure we're not creating new problems for sure. All right, great.
And if I could just jump in, I actually, on that same vein and thinking about like proactive measures in terms of student safety and wellness, and certainly the sustainability of the teaching profession in general, I guess I'm curious if this group has a pulse on access to school-based mental health supports in Ward 1 schools and in schools in 1A, and how those supports are being utilized in the return to school this year. Because I think whether that's how that affects safe passage even, right? Like the relationships and students' ability to communicate with each other in a productive way, like that all feeds into what we're often seeing in terms of violence and conflict in classrooms. And, you know, that's just something that I would love to talk about and hear what you all think is, you know, really available in the landscape right now for families.
Damian, is that something that you've had a chance to hear about yet?
I haven't heard too much about it. If I'm honest, I mean, it's a whole separate unit. The social workers are, you know, not even in our building. So I don't know necessarily a detailed sense of it, but I think it's something that if there are specific questions, I'm happy to reach out to specific social workers that might have, or somebody that could kind of direct and give me some more intel on that, essentially.
And I'm just going to build on what Dylan was saying, because I think for me, I'm less concerned about what DCPS thinks it's offering as far as mental health supports. I'm more concerned with how that's translating into actual practice. And I say, you know, just as an example, you know, I know schools that have their assigned mental health professionals who have the time and the luxury because they don't have high needs populations, but in schools where you have a lot of need, and again, this is what I'm hearing from Tubman, for example, where the kids, there's just, you know, it's across the board, it's just such high numbers. I don't know if that's enough. Whatever Tubman has is in place is not enough. And so I think I would be more curious, sort of as you're talking to families, as you're sort of tapping into those conversations with parents that we don't have on Twitter, that aren't highly vocalized and highly exposed. I would be curious to hear if they feel they're getting enough support as mental health counseling, as Dylan has identified, for themselves and for their students, right? Well, students especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I actually had a little better pulse of it from the higher achievement angle, where I was interacting with school social workers, because I was making those referrals. And I mean, I definitely think that's an area. I'm not even sure what school isn't stretched thin on that, because I remember Hardy was one of the school, and Deal was one of the schools I was communicating with for some of our students, and they the social worker was very attentive and took my call and helped get help for the student, and was also like, I've never met this student before. I have a lot, like my caseload is like super full. Like I think there's a consistent capacity issue, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think it's across the board, but I think, you know, it's a tough situation. We've certainly, you know, I think the numbers we identified, and I know one of PAVE's campaigns was along with many of our coalitions for youth supports, we're advocating for that mental health. I feel like those were based on pre-COVID numbers. I think we need to completely reevaluate that landscape and what that looks like. And, you know, I'd love to hear more, and maybe sort of as you're having conversations, as Dylan has sort of said, getting a feel of what that landscape is like for the recipients of those services.
Absolutely. And every time I disappear, I'm just taking notes. So just be aware of that.
Okay, no, that's fine. I apologize that I'm making your list super long.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Does anybody want to sort of add in? I know this has been something, for those who are new, that our commission has consistently advocated for, those mental health supports, not just from a lens of education, but also for, and Dylan, thank you for pointing out, for a public safety lens, making sure that we aren't waiting until our young people are out of school and, you know, suffering from these adverse childhood experiences, and and not getting the access to the opportunities and the rich lives that they deserve. Great. Any other questions for Damian? And I put poor Hannah on the spot, so maybe I should put everybody on. Liliana, did you want to speak to Damian? I definitely want to hear about more that, you know, sort of his thoughts on ways we can partner with DCPL. So maybe this would be a good time to sort of like center on you, unless other folks want to ask another question.
No. Well, during the pandemic and now that we are kind of trying to get back to the new normal, or like a more stable model of service, we're just trying to connect with partners. I feel like this is the most useful platform that we have, just to hear what's going on with schools. Like, it is really hard to get this input. So I am open to hear like what's the need. That way, this is the beginning of the school year. So we are starting programs. We start passing like all the programming that's going to start at the library to attend public schools, to attend like to learn what's the need in the community in order to start developing our like programs and what we can offer, taking into account the limitations of space, of how many people we can host, and all this. Like, this is very useful, and I'm just taking a lot of notes, because so far we are trying to maintain the connections with the schools that we work, the ones that are still in touch with us, and it's been hard to, and we absolutely understand teachers have a lot to deal with right now, that being insistent or like trying to reach out too much is overwhelming for them. So we're just trying to give them space, and we're not being super active, but we are there. We just want to listen what's the need, and from there we can start like offering more, and this is very useful. Yeah.
And I just want to quickly highlight Anna's comment in the chat, because I think it links into DC Public Library, which is literacy, right? Huge focus right now. And, you know, I'm going to, again, I always like throw my poor kids in as the examples, but we didn't read a lot during COVID. You would think we were locked in. We'd like my kids to speak 5 languages. No, we didn't read. They played video games. And so I suspect that this was a challenge. And we didn't have access to the library either, right? Like our public, you know, our books, and for kids who don't have parents who can just pop onto Amazon, that was a huge loss. Like all those access points to to just natural interfacing with books and literacy. So in addition to the learning losses, just having access to books.
Yes, we're trying to recover that base of patrons that we have lost, because it is evident that we don't have as many people in branches. Well, at least at Mount Pleasant, we don't have as many people. We have the same people that have always been present, but we lost a lot of the new ones. So we're trying to recover, and it's hard.
So one thing that I know, and I'm kind of thinking, sorry, I'm just going to spitball this, because here's where I think our committee can help, or at least sort of work to maybe to work on this, is we had talked in the past about how can we get books into some of our communities with high densities of families. So I'm thinking Columbia Heights Village has a huge contingent of children and families. We have Hubbard House, which also has a huge amount of young people concentrated. These are all, affordable and low income housing. So we're also having families that are struggling. I know the Woodner, I think, is also another concentrated space where we have a lot of families. How can we get the library to them, maybe? Since I think, as you pointed out, and Damian, I'm sort of looking, maybe this is a synergy moment for DCPS. It's tough for our teachers and our administrations to organize anything else on top of what they're already doing. But I'm wondering if we can't lean into the library to organize some book events, a bookmobile, or And Liliana, I know we're going to meet and talk about something we can do in our plaza area. So I don't know, I'm spitballing here.
I'm taking notes. Yeah.
So is Damian. Every time he goes off screen, we know he's taking notes.
Yes, I'm taking notes because we're getting a new teens librarian. We haven't had that position in a long time. So we're very excited to start programming with them. I feel like the person is coming in very soon. So we're very excited and wait for us.
Well, Damian, is that, I mean, because I know DCPS has their families cornerstones that they kicked off, I think during COVID. But I'm wondering, is there a space or a way that your team can help coordinate between these families outside of the school or to the library? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not fully versed on I mean, most of the families I'm personally connected to are through higher achievement still, so I wouldn't necessarily have quite that answer. But the one thing that's coming to mind that's pretty new is the fact that every school now has either 2 part-time librarians or a full-time librarian per a council edict in May. So that's actually, you know, especially if you're losing kind of the teachers because they're so overburdened right now, I think the librarians in my mind are less overburdened because their sole focus is that library piece in schools. And maybe I'm mischaracterizing and I don't know squat diddly about what a school librarian does during the day, but in terms of somebody who potentially, I mean, I just read an article about the librarian at, I want to say it was Ron Brown. They used to be the Czech librarian and they moved to Ward 7. But it was really great school librarian, really passionate. He kept things going during COVID, outdoor reading groups, and he's done a really great job of making like a cafe vibe that's really been like a space for kids. And that seems like a type of partner. Obviously now he's not a Czech, so he's not down the street anymore, but connecting with librarians who have that. I mean, Bancroft I know is right there in Mount Pleasant. I would start with, if you're looking to make connections within a school, I would start with the librarians. The other person I would connect to is our partnerships guy, who can really kind of, Sean at in our partnerships team, because he takes stock of all the requests schools have for partners, as well as the offers from partners, and does like a matchmaking kind of thing. So that could be another really good connector person to get you all in touch with. I'm happy. I'll make a note to follow up and get you the contact for Sean. And I need to check, there might be a single person that is like in charge, like almost like a supervisor to all the librarians, that's central based. I'll check if that's correct. And if that's the case, that might be a great person to connect with, because he can then pass that on to all the librarians and start making those connections. Because that in my mind is like the best jumping off point, at least from the school side of things.
So I'm wondering, I love that. And I appreciate that you volunteered to make those connections, because I was going to ask you. Liliana, can you sort of give an idea of which schools, and I'm assuming Bancroft, because having been there, my kids went there every single week. I do know the librarian at Oyster Adams he's also their tech person, Mr. Birch. I know he's very involved. I have not, I mean, my kids don't go to Tubman, but I'm wondering, Liliana, besides Bancroft, if there are any other schools in the area, or if Tubman, Bruce Monroe, Marie Reed, Damian, you rattle them off. If those, and because I'm really sort of thinking like Czech is our middle school. I know they've got a pretty robust program. But I'm especially thinking of our elementary schools, and especially with Tubman, I know could really use, I assume I know that there are lots of things they could use help with.
Yes, so at the beginning of the school year, so let's say this month, we send a letter to all librarians and school connections that we have, offering the presence of the library, how we can support them. And based on that, we start like working with them. There are very few people that responded and based on that, we start working. So, for example, I work directly with a Bancroft. Some of my coworkers have their own connections with other schools, but this year the responses have been like very, very slow, and we understand, and we're not trying to push too hard because also we're a little understaffed. So it's hard, but we need to be more strategic about the services that we offer, and that's having this input is useful.
So one thing I would also maybe task you with, Damian, again, as you're doing all this other stuff, as you sort of get a sense, the longer you're doing this, the more you're engaging with families, a sense of where we can carve out space for our families and get a sense on how we can sort of move them to these partnerships, especially with DCPL. Liliana, I'm going to go ahead and I've got it here. I know you and I are going to meet for a chat. Is it this Friday? No, next week. So what I do think from the sounds of it, and Damian, it also sounds like this from you as well, our schools are overburdened. So maybe this is something we need to bring into the community and take ownership of. And I think that's something, not just our commission, but I know 1B and 1C are also very eager to start increasing programming and opportunities for our young people. So this is where I'm going to lean into them for more hands. And since we have Moises here, what can the mayor do for us, Moises?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, sorry.
It's okay. It's good to see everyone. My name is Moises de Rosario. As always, have the privilege of serving as your Ward 1 Mokers. I love the conversation around librarians. I do know those are, the cornerstone, in my opinion, of a lot of our schools and wear a lot of different hats per se. With that being said, as far as connecting points, I'm gonna leave my contact information. Mokers, we do have record of librarians for each of the schools within Ward 1. So if you've been having, trouble communicating or contacting, any one of our librarians would be more than happy to help facilitate that conversation. Additionally, one of the things that I did take interest in, and I'm very, happy that it was mentioned during this meeting, is how we're dealing with student discipline. That isn't an angle that I've heard before. So I'm very happy that, it was explored on in this conversation, but it is something that we're going to follow up on. We're going to reach out to DCPS and leadership to see if there's anything tracking that data, because coming out of, a pandemic posture, I think it's really important to think about how that affects how that affects one, return to normalcy, but also their behavior and mental health. So seeing that data as far as suspensions and any discipline, once we had returned, I think it's important to see, and I'm definitely sure it's something that the community would want to see. The second part of that, I think I heard during the conversation, was the DCPS mental health team. And we do oftentimes, and I say unfortunately, work with them because usually when Mokers are in contact with mental health team at DCPS is because the student has, experienced a life-altering event. Usually it's in response to fires, etc. But I do know that the mayor put in $8 million in the fiscal year 22 budget to expand a lot of the mental health programs. One of the things that are included is therapeutic intervention to help students cope with stress and trauma. I think even more importantly now, as I said, that we're coming out of a pandemic posture and back to a return in person. The other thing that they do is, they link students and their families to general resources or gain access, I guess, to food, clothing, transportation, things that might be linked to something academically, but something that they may need at home. So just making sure that we're able to, wrap all the services that we have around. Happy to be part of this conversation. Like I said, I'm gonna put my contact information in the chat. And if there is some way, I don't know if there's like a listserv for the committee where I can share an update, or Commissioner, I'll share an update with you just after I speak with DCPS about these items.
Yeah, no, I'll send you the listserv because I would love for folks to have that widely, and I'm up sometimes a little slow on the uptake. But one thing that really flashed out to me were these therapeutic interventions. I know that again, Dylan, I'm gonna just sort of direct a little bit to you. We've been following the in-school mental health supports, of course. And thank you, Mayor Bowser, for the $8 million, and also for our council members who came and put even more in, because we know it is so critical. But one thing I hadn't gotten a good read on were those therapeutic interventions, and how are those funds being accounted for, and how can we ensure that they're getting where they're needed? Do you have any sense on, are they going in through Department of Health Services?
So yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely the question right now. Christine is like, now that we did have funding to fully fund the school-based mental health expansion, a program that's managed by DBH. First of all, want to make sure that, to your point earlier, not only is there availability of those services, but is there access, and for those kids who, need services right now, like that they're able to get them and their families know about them. But also, like, so much about mental health is beyond, providers. That's one huge piece of it, but we also want to have just baseline trauma-informed schools, right? And that is training that our teachers deserve to have. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is understanding how both DCPS and other LEAs are funding those sorts of tier 1 and 2 services. When you think about all the components of supporting students' mental health. And school climate is a huge part of that. And there's so many different programs that plug into that. It's a complex landscape, right? The mental health landscape. And so would definitely love to continue that conversation too, and hear from other folks on the call and what they sort of see as the main players in that. But I definitely appreciate, Moises, your willingness to take that question back as well.
Yeah, no, and I think what I'm gonna task you with, Moises, because we've been putting a lot on Damian's plate, is to help us follow up on that funds, especially with, and just for folks, DBH, the Department of Behavioral Health, and DHS, the Department of Health Services. If we throw out acronyms, please just stop us and correct. I know sometimes it's a bad habit. Damian does have to leave at 8. We typically go till 1:30 or 8:30. But I did promise Damian it would be a very short, I only keep him for a little bit, and he's coming back into the community tomorrow. So if folks have any last minute questions, I'm gonna go ahead and let Damian go.
I got one.
When?
Yeah, and it's a short one, and this is sort of piggybacking off of what Liliana had talked about, what DCPL was doing in terms of literacy and working towards recovery. And I wanted to share sort of an observation that came out of our education roundtable, as well as a rhetorical question, which is, we're pretty confident in terms of the support that students are getting in terms of literacy through the library system, through groups like the Literacy Lab. But the rhetorical question is, what is the component for mathematics? There's not who's pushing math recovery outside of this classroom or the school. So we have this great, support mechanism, link between DCPL and what goes on in the classroom in terms of literacy, but there's not a corresponding towards mathematics. And, I think the stats were saying that, the student, learning loss is greater in the mathematics than it is in the literacy. And I don't know if that's harder to do. And so the rhetorical question is, how do we support mathematic recovery, and through what organization or mechanism? And so I'll leave it on that, so that's one you can take home with you, Damian. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just also tag on one last rhetorical question. I'm looking at Anna for this one, which is our special ed students as well. I know they have it's been, I don't know if devastating is too harsh a word, but it's been truly a bigger challenge, as we've seen and know. So I'll throw that one in as well. And for no other reason, just sort of like things for us to think about as we're looking at supports in the future, and how do we best make sure we're getting resources to our families and our young people. Okay. I'm glad to see you. Thank you for joining us. We're going to see you. I'm going to see you again tomorrow. So if folks have questions that come to them and I wish I'd asked him. He'll be on another community meeting tomorrow, which I'll send out the information for folks as well. And then of course, I will make sure to include Damian's contact information for everybody so they can pepper him with emails left and right. All right.
I can go ahead and put that in the chat right now too.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So thank you so much, Damian. So we always have so much to cover, and especially since we've had such a long summer, or I guess it's not a long summer, it's the summer, a month off. A lot of stuff has sort of come up, and I'm going to go ahead and, Damian, please feel free to just jump off whenever you need to. One thing that's coming up, and I think sort of as we're getting into the fall and school is coming up, is safe passages. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to read the emails I sent out about the grants that came out. There was one that, and I apologize, it's safe passages, safety block, or some such thing, I apologize, which actually was using federal funds to support the mandate of safe passages, which is really just creating community engagement and partnerships to help our young people. It's a multi-agency. So it's that, but it's also Department of Transportation and other agencies and those involved. So I don't know if folks had a chance to see that, but I do know that the other commissioners that are involved with this committee are very interested in collaborating on that. So I don't know if folks want to ask some questions. I don't have as much information in front of me, but I'm also happy to sort of like give us something to think about on that. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and just put a pin in that safe passages and work on that for our next meeting. We do have our roadmap that came out that I don't think we're going to really have enough time to dive into it in this meeting. So I'll put that in. I may just start circulating that asynchronistically if folks are interested in contributing or coming up with ideas and action steps on that. Any thoughts? Okay, great. Okay, great. Damian was the big one tonight. So if there are any other questions or any thoughts or ideas that we can address in the next month, I'm just going to open the floor.
The only thing I was going to add, Christine, is just
Sure.
on the question of safe passage. I think, if folks are interested, there is a bill going to a hearing on the safe passage issue on October 12th. And so the Committee on Transportation is going to be holding a hearing on a bill that basically funds an Office of Safe Passage. And that office is what will be tasked with managing those grants and identifying the community organizations largely that will be serving as some of the, for lack of a better word, boots on the ground and reinforcements and violence interrupters in some cases, or some of the programs that they're looking at funding. And so if folks are interested, definitely something that we'll be tuning into.
That's good to
We'll
know.
be talking more about too.
Yeah, I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've been talking about safe passages, and here just legislation just passed me right by. Passed on by, if you get it.
I do get it.
That's actually really good to know. Do you happen to know if the grant awards are pending?
So
establishment or the establishment?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I mean, if this Office of Safe Passage is established, like that will just be the entity that manages and funds that. Absent an Office of Safe Passage, I think that would move directly through the committee, I imagine. That's my understanding.
Because Learn 24 did the grant.
Okay,
Mhm.
got it.
Well, but and again, those funds came from the federal.
Right,
They were not district local funds.
right.
But we want to, and we're still waiting. I had asked around to see if any of our community-based organizations had applied for that grant. The ones that come to mind immediately are LAYC, the Latin American. Well, I can't, the acronyms. Liliana.
Acronyms.
And acronyms are failing me. I'm afraid. Do you have, wait, what is the acronym again? Latin American Youth
Center.
Center.
That's it.
Thank you. LAYC, yes. And they have a diverse range of programs and services that they provide both to youth and to families. So they seemed like an obvious choice to apply for that grant, but I hadn't heard. And I don't know if anybody else has heard. Okay. Moises, there was one last question I was going to ask you, and I can't quite recall it, but I'm sort of thinking to your office, not just the Mokers, but all of the mayor's offices, if there's anyone that you can think of that might be good to tap into for some of the, especially I think sort of the community driven partnerships with the public library. Are there any of your offices that might be interested in partnering up with that? The Office of Father, Men and Boys, or I'm trying to, yeah.
Yeah, I can circle back, but I think, yeah, I'm gonna reach out to Deputy Mayor Ken just to see if there's already, programs or, entities that are already involved in this work. But if not, off the top of my head, I would say possibly Demois, but I wouldn't want to put them on the spot like that. But Deputy Mayor's Office of Operations and Infrastructure, I definitely would believe that they'd be more than happy to participate. If you put it in like a brief email for me, I can definitely connect the pieces for you.
Okay, you're talking about Safe Passage, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I jumped back to a previous conversation with the library. Because what I'd really love to see, and Liliana, we can pick this conversation up in our chat, but I would love, because as it's been talked about, I think our schools are just overstretched, and to be like, hey, we have this great new idea, and let's do it. I think that's a bit much. So I'm really thinking maybe this could be a community driven effort to really get our library into the community. And I don't want to put more work on you, Liliana. So it's just, I'm throwing out an idea.
No, absolutely. But I think primarily the first place I would stop to make that connection would be MOCA, Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, just because that, that's the big umbrella for most of our constituent service or outreach arms,
right.
Whether that's, directly with Latino affairs, Pacific Islander affairs, African American affairs,
right.
But we'll be able to hit, many more birds with a, lack of a better term.
Still heading, and just for folks, that's the Mayor's Office of Constituent Affairs. Yay.
So,
did I get that right?
Yes, she is the director. And I think actually she may be stepping down.
That's what I was wondering, because she's
running, I think, for council. I think in Ward 5. And with that being said, there is some things going around as far as a replacement, but nothing official just yet.
Okay, is that something you can connect us with? If Liliana, if maybe we could get some of these other government Mayor's Office of Latino Affairs for our community, it sounds like that's the one I'm immediately thinking of. So I do know Jackie Reyes and Eduardo, but I'm just wondering if maybe you could put us in contact with some of the other organizations as well, if that makes sense to you, Liliana.
I don't have a lot of contacts, but yes, let's work together and let's
Okay.
start those connections.
Yep.
We
Great.
are,
We'll even do a spreadsheet.
yes, we have lost so much. Like,
What I can
There's a
also do,
lot to do,
Liliana,
and I think, you know, as one of my favorite commissioners, Dottie Love Wade, loves to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I think, you know, if we can just sort of start with a small bite, and get like a, you know, some of our books into the hands of our young people, and I think that's going to really help if we can meet them where they are.
the library is willing to do that. We
Awesome.
have lost a lot because of short staffing, because of the pandemic, because so many circumstances, but we're willing to get back on track.
Great. I'm so excited. And I'm really excited to do this work. And I know ANC 1A and also our other commissions will also be very excited to participate. And hopefully they'll do the planning.
I could quickly add, I think another way that we could possibly make a lot of these connections, MOKers have core team meetings every month. So we meet once a month with all of our district agencies, as well as all of our executive partners. And the reason we do that is to go through any and everything that may be happening in Ward 1 as it relates to their agency. But it's also a great opportunity, I think, you know, to connect with Latino affairs, to connect with African American affairs, and all of our MOCA offices, all 15 or 16 of them will be on the call, but all the primary points of contact as far as outreach or engagement will be there. So what I'm gonna do, I think our next core team meeting is October 14th. I'm gonna, you know, forward the invitation to you both.
Okay, excellent. And I do, just for folks who might not know, I want to just sort of explain all the things that I'll translate, if you will, that Moises just read. The mayor's offices cover a lot of very specialized groups. So we have Latin affairs, which is MOLA. We have African, oh gosh, Moises, you're gonna have to like help me out here. We have LGBTQ plus, we have women, we have
Community
Asian.
affairs, African affairs, African American affairs, Mayor's Office of the Clean City, Mayor's Office of Fathers, Men and Boys,
That's the
Latino
one I was-
affairs, LGBTQ affairs, Office of Nightlife and Culture, Religious affairs, returning citizens. Am I missing any? Veteran affairs, Mayor's Office of Women's Policy, initiatives, and Serve DC, Mayor's Office of
volunteers, which I wonder if we could tap into Serve DC as well when we're looking for volunteers for these events that we're going to hopefully be able to organize with the mayor's money.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Just let me know when and where.
Yeah, tell the mayor I'm coming after her pocketbook.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. And speaking of pocketbooks, which for the recording, I'm not literally going into the mayor's pocketbook, but I do want her funding support. The other, I think sort of one thing that we really want to be strategic about with this committee, and I'm just going to put this bug in everyone's ears. I want to sort of lay the groundwork. We don't want to wait until budget season to start asking. We want to start lining up those asks now. And I'm an example. And Liliana, you were there when we were conceptualizing this. We want a full-time employee for DPR, the Department of Parks and Recs, garden program, because we are going to have a garden in our community next spring and we need the manpower. Although they wouldn't actually come and be funded until next October. But I mean, that's just an example of something I know our community really wants to see, which is more of this garden programming, more robust opportunities for our young people. So we need to ask for a person to fund that. I know mental health will always be something that we're going to be asking for. I know in the past, more full-time employees for the library was something that we've had to ask for. Maybe that's something we need to be thinking about again this year. So I just want us to start thinking about things we are not seeing funded in our community, but also the things that were funded in this most recent budget, which starts October 1st, the fiscal year for the District of Columbia begins October 1st. We got a lot of money. So, you know, considering how difficult COVID was and how much we spent between those federal dollars combined with some of our local and increased tax, we did get a lot of things funded. So we as a committee, and I think as commissioners and just residents in our city, need to make sure that money goes where it was promised. And so I want our committee to sort of start thinking about, how do we ensure the dollars that were funded get to the people in our community that need them? So just some things I want to throw out to folks. If anybody is like super in love with wonky budget stuff, please feel free to go through that budget again and identify things and be like, oh, this line item on page 1027, you know, this could be for us, would be fantastic. Great. Any last minute thoughts or questions or things we want to address or cover? All right, great. Really wonderful to see so many new faces and of course see the familiar faces. Anna, you and I are going to have to connect because it's been too long. And for everyone else, I will see you very soon. And thank you very much. And Hannah, if you have any questions that you want to follow up with me, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. It's sad to say goodbye, but I want to give you your evening back.
Nice to meeting you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.